Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching. Morning disturbed the peace that reigned in the lonely brunette's soul. Sleeping peacefully in the huge bed under the silk sheets, he opened his eyes and discerned the alarm clock that threatened to go off with a loud bang. "Tidden a minute," he sighed. He dreamt of his childhood. It was nice and fun, and the girl classmates were smiling at him. He got up, shook his head, and beat the alarm clock by hitting the snooze button. No, that's it. Now the silence of this morning is threatened by nothing. I wish I could get more sleep just once. Until about 7 o'clock, Max muttered. He got up, forced himself to go to the shower, and there he was again, overcoming himself. After a warm shower, he turned on the icy rain, counted to 10 and turned on the icy rain, counted to 10 and turned on the warm water again. And so 3 times. It was a beastly, unbearable procedure which nevertheless served as a guarantee of vivacity and a good emotional background. They say it's good for your health. The coffee was brewed, half drunk, and left. Max buttoned the buttons on his blue long-sleeve shirt, anticipating that the hot August day would make him regret his choice of closet. He had several business meetings ahead of him, lunch with the big boss, and much more. And it was on a Sunday. The rest of the summer was unbearably hot, as if the sun wanted to get even for all the cool and rainy summer. Max came out of the driveway, got into a big black car, and slammed the door like a proprietor. It was his deputy's idea to come to business meetings in his father's car so that the business partners would not think they were dealing with a brand new boss of whom they could wring strings. As a matter of fact, he could. Just not everyone. Max was much softer, less assertive. He did not know how to use leverage to achieve his goals. However, he needed to create such an image so that his competitors would not feel weak and his partners would not change their respectfully fearful attitude. On the way to the office, Max thought of Dad. Their last conversation was the kind of conversation he would like to forget, like a bad dream. "You should be a good replacement. I need a wife for you too. You don't want to get married? Just do it for the record. I'll find you a partner. I already have candidates in mind. You see, this is a strategy, one of the building blocks of your image as my successor. And everybody should know that we have a strong dynasty, and if you take out one brick, it will all fall apart." His father was a stately older man with gray hair, always in a suit. Max couldn't remember a time when he'd seen him in other clothes. There had been such a moment a couple of years ago, though, when he'd been in the hospital and his son had visited him. Then the doctor said that everything would be fine, and only recently Max discovered the truth. The father knew long ago that his days were numbered. His heart disease was congenital, and the doctors honestly told him about the deplorable condition of that organ. And for someone like him, try not to tell honestly. Usually doctors hide the fatal diagnosis from the patient and tell his relatives, but in this case his father made sure that his family did not know anything, did not worry, and did not know anything, did not worry, and did not treat him with pity. Neither, however, did his competitors. He hated being pitied. He never showed his weakness to anyone. Max didn't understand why he was scolded for crying as a boy, since other boys cried and were pitied. And when Max cried, he received more scolding and indignation from his father. Do you hear yourself? I have to get married and live my whole life without love to create certain impressions. It's not a brick wall, it's my life, mine. Maybe I want to do music instead of your business in the first place. Don't you think I have desires of my own? Screamed Max, tired of his father's tyranny. If it wasn't for my business, you wouldn't even know what music is. That business paid for your schooling. I let you study music for your general development, to build up the creativity you need for our work. And you want to give up my life's work to play piano at some conservatory? Okay, fine. What are you going to give your kids? A wife you meet for love? I'll give them freedom of choice, Max countered. They don't need freedom of choice. They need something to eat, something to wear, something to drive around town. They need to think with their heads. Love is not the basis for creating a family. Take Eastern families, for example, where the strongest marriages are created. They marry strangers in general, and their love blossoms in the marriage. They get to know each other. They fall in love, and their love doesn't go out. That's a good example. Take us. You fall in love, you walk hand in hand, then you start living together. Like your cousin, for example. In living together, you get to know each other from a different side. She gets to know that you walk around the house in your underwear. And you, the fact that she doesn't like anything at all from what you both used to like, and all the romantic feelings are crushed by everyday life. And then you start fighting and break up. Either you get married so it doesn't feel like your whole relationship was nothing. Get a divorce. After a couple of years realizing that nothing is salvageable anymore, I'm offering you the best way. Take heed. Max was quiet. He was tired of fighting with his father. You're right. But I'm not. After all, there's no guarantee that the woman you choose will be the woman I can love later. It has to be my choice. I'm not Eastern blood, and that's not the way for me, you know. They argued for a long time. Max tried to end the conflict, but my father was determined to press on. It occurred to him that it was time for his son to get married, and that he should be the one to choose his wife. These memories flowed smoothly into other memories. On the day of the funeral, perhaps the only moment when my father was not in charge, he lay quietly and silently, and everyone said goodbye to him. And Max wanted to cry many times, but he didn't dare, knowing that his father wouldn't approve. He shook his head, driving away unpleasant memories. A light flashed ahead. Before he could think of anything, there was a sudden jolt. There was the sound of breaking glass. He didn't know who had hit him. A second ago, the highway was almost empty. It was always deserted on a Sunday. The thought flashed through his mind that the speedometer was 100, and the seat belt. He couldn't remember if he'd buckled up or not. The next second, he felt the pain of hitting his head. Something warm ran down his arm. It was his blood. Everything froze, became silent. Max knew he had to get up, but he couldn't. Soon someone's hand touched him. "How are you?" a woman's voice asked. Max looked up. She was spinning so hard he almost threw up. Not so good. Max got up from his seat with great difficulty, opened the door, and staggered out. He saw a gazelle nearby with a man lying beside it. He was alive and trying to get up. "What's wrong with him?" Max asked. "He is drunk." A woman answered him. She was short, with red hair and full lips, pretty even without makeup. Max smiled. She was embarrassed when he noticed it. "How do you feel?" she asked him very seriously. Her brown eyes and red hair, a combination Max liked very much. He thought she was as beautiful as autumn itself, and immediately felt an unbearable pain literally all over his body, but most of all in his arm. The pretty girl sat him down on the pavement and began unhooking the straps from her beautiful black purse. "I'm fine," Max said, not understanding what was going on or what she was doing. The girl took his hand and began to tear his shirt off. Why would he need a sleeve shirt on such a hot day? "Don't look here," she commanded. Max didn't look away, but when the sleeve was ripped open, he saw that there was a huge laceration on his arm. The veins must have been nicked. There was so much blood that he began to lose consciousness. His eyes went dark, and Max squeezed his eyes shut. "And I warned you not to look," as the girl said. She confidently wrapped the strap around his arm and tightened it so tightly that the boy shrieked. "That's it," she smiled. "What's your name?" "Stay here. I'll be right there." She went to the drunk driver who must have been responsible for the accident. Max took a closer look. His gazelle was more wrecked and was standing almost in the middle of the road. Drivers drove by carefully to avoid hitting it. The window of his own car was pierced. Some kind of iron was sticking right through the windshield. It must have hurt his arm. And if it had entered the glass a few inches to the left, it might have punctured his chest, and then he wouldn't have seen that red-headed beastie with the nurse's skills walking toward him again. "What happened anyway?" asked her Max. "I don't understand where that drunk driver came from." "That's the man over there, and he ran into you. Before that, he was moving on the sidewalk, almost ran over a granny who was cursing at him. She might have cursed him, by the way. The girl obviously had a sense of humor, or she was just distracting him from the terrible pain. Should we call the doctors?" he suggested, feeling that more was becoming unbearable. I called right away. "And the traffic police will be here now? But they'll take you away earlier. Is this the first time you've been in an accident?" she asked. "Yes, it's my father's car." He suddenly thought his father would be furious. It didn't matter that he'd been hit. He would tear up and tear down, blaming Max for driving the wrong way, failing to anticipate that there would be a drunk driver. He would surely find something to blame him for. "Would he cuss?" asked the red-headed beauty. "No, he won't. A good father is a blessing," she sighed, looking at his hands. "I don't know. Mine was wicked. He died a while ago." She raised her eyebrows. She wanted to say something, but at that moment help arrived. Max was quickly placed in the car. Doctor thanked the girl who had skillfully applied the splint. "Clark learned from the best," she replied, smiling. Max looked at her and knew he should ask for her number, but the situation took an unexpected turn. The motor started and they drove to the hospital. Max realized that his savior and the doctor knew each other. "You, then, are not just a brave stranger. You're a professional," Max said. "I'm a nurse, but I work in surgery. I've seen how they do everything there." "So you were just doing your medical duty?" Max sighed sadly. "I saved your life. You have something to complain about?" She smiled. "I thought you liked me." "It's just that if medics only helped people they liked, we'd be extinct like mammoths," she replied jokingly. Max smiled. "But we'd all have to watch ourselves so the medics would like us if anything happened." And that's right. They talked about nonsense all the way. He got the girl's number and found out her name was Lionel. Max was brought into the hospital building and immediately, bypassing the line, was taken to the surgeon. The surgeon began to treat the wound and put a dozen stitches in it. After that, Max was left for observation, placed in an empty room with several beds. The anesthetic was working and he felt better. Thoughts flowed. He had wrecked his father's car today. It would probably still be repairable, but it would definitely cost a pretty penny. After all, if the driver of the Gazelle was to blame, there must be insurance. Dad would get mad and still make his son work off all the money he had invested in the repairs. He thought that was the way to teach his son to appreciate money, and Max always wanted this family to value him. He remembered how good it used to be when he was very young. Dad rarely went out with him, but Mom made him set aside one day a week and spend it with his only son. They'd go to the playground, race the tin can, and buy all sorts of unnecessary things along the way. His father did everything to please his son, but only one day a week, and the other days Max wasn't allowed into his father's room because he worked tirelessly without a day off, just like Max himself, who now inherited his father's entire fortune and his bank. When Max's father first began to rise, he was a simple engineer, but he had an analytical mind and a strong will. These two qualities were enough to make $1 million. He figured it all out, took out a loan from the bank, and rented space. It all started with furniture manufacturing. He had hired workers to make furniture. Everything else fell on his shoulders. Max's father, Jacob, became an accountant himself. He handled the shipping shipments himself, the customers. It was incredibly hard work. The man worked around the clock, sleeping 4 hours a day, but he made it, It was around this time that he met Max's mother. She was an economist by education, giving him sound advice. They began to build their empire together. She loved him very much, dusted him off. But Max couldn't say that about his father. He only saw him as a businessman, which he was even at home. He gave the impression that his father had a purely business relationship with them, not a family at all. Within a few years, they were able to expand production, hire the best craftsmen, advertise all over the region, and make the first $1 million. The father was not interested in the furniture itself. He just wanted to be rich. A hungry childhood took its toll. They lived so poor that they had to starve, going through other people's garbage looking for a piece. Apparently, that's why, after earning money, Max's father gained a lot. He ate in expensive restaurants for his entire starving childhood. However, having a strong will, it was not difficult for him to say goodbye to 30 extra pounds in just 2 months. It came as a shock to his business partners. They hardly recognized him. But people understood what kind of person they were dealing with. They respected him. Later, the furniture empire was sold with guts for a huge amount of money, which was invested in opening his own bank. Mom took care of the financial side. She did the necessary calculations, and my father continued to deal with people, rentals, and advertising. So their own bank became a model of stability. When they managed to go digital, the profits doubled. With the flourishing of the internet in the masses, lending became one of the best ways to get rich. Business thrived. Max didn't grow up on fairy tales. Dad always told him stories about business, avoiding complicated terms. That was his way of trying to accustom the future heir to the business that would soon become his life's work. And Max fell asleep to these stories without understanding their essence. In fact, this arrangement suited his father. But it was so only until Max grew up. The boy was 14 when his father first brought him to the bank, introduced all the employees, and then made him repeat the name and patronymic of each of them. Man didn't remember any of them. "And how are you going to work here?" asked his father. "Dad, I like making music. I would like to be a musician," the boy answered. "Music is your hobby. In your spare time, you do what you want. I give you money so you can afford to buy a good instrument, you know." He asked. "I understand." Max answered. Maybe it wasn't his environment at all. Or maybe out of old habit, Max always wanted to sleep when it came to bank business. Toward adulthood, he and his father came to an agreement. Music was still a hobby, but you couldn't quit the business, and you had to get into it. Max realized the value of money when he started courting girls and quickly learned that they need him only with a car and a magnificent bouquet of roses. This realization got him interested in the bank's business. His father was pleased and began praising his son, which was a delight to his ears. So Max enrolled as a part-time student at the Institute of Finance and Business and began working in the office with his father. In the evenings, he ran on dates, disappeared at night, changing girls like gloves. It was hard to wake him up in the morning, but his mother didn't give up, and every time she made her son get cleaned up and go to work. At that time, his father clearly realized that his son was not interested in work. He wanted to be popular with women, and only for the sake of it, he was ready to come to the office. In fact, he went there with a hangover and lipstick stains. Sometimes he was found asleep in the back room. His father wasn't shy about giving him a beating in front of his coworkers. Max became a spoiled brat to everyone. That is why he and his father often had quarrels and disagreements. However, Max still held his temper, did not get drunk, did not skip a lot. Except occasionally. His father had a formal employment contract with him and deducted from his salary for each truancy. Then Max seduced a local doctor, and she helped him get sick leave if he needed it. But that relationship didn't last long. In the office, Max was considered a joker and a jester. Nobody ever took him seriously. Colleagues enjoyed listening to his funny stories about how he ended up in his underpants on someone's balcony and how women fought over him, but it soon stopped. After his father died, Max had to get into the business, and there was simply no time for women. Memories were interrupted by a doctor who came into the room to examine him. Soon, Max was on his way home in a cab. I had to cancel all appointments in the business that had been planned for today. Since the day his father passed away and Max took over his chair, this was the first time he hadn't gone to work. He was afraid of not being taken seriously, afraid of not pulling through morally, because a bank is a very multifaceted organization that depends on many people. Max took on a huge responsibility. He had not only to perform current affairs, but also to engage in development, to make deals, to make useful acquaintances. Only now he understood why his father gave him only 1 day a week, and even that was to run to the office if he managed to put his son to bed during the day. Of course, he had been terribly busy at the time. And today, Max was trying his best to justify his legacy and his right to the presidency. At home, my mother was frightened when she saw the bandage on her son's arm. "You got in a fight again?" "Just like in high school, Max." "What happened to you?" "What will they think of you at work?" "Isn't this guy going to sue?" The mother was all over the place. It wasn't clear whether she was worried about her son's health or how his injuries would affect the business. I was in a car accident, and I wasn't the culprit. I was hit by some drunk man. He's alive, too. Don't worry. He answered all her questions at once. She stopped and looked at her adult son. "What's your injury? Is it broken?" she asked worriedly. "Did you cut yourself?" worriedly. "Did you cut yourself?" "It's going to be okay," Max said. He still had to go to 2 appointments that same day. He wasn't feeling bad and decided that going to work with an injury might make the right impression. In all his years of work, his father rarely allowed himself to go on sick leave. He only did so when the illness was contagious and his going to work had hurt his co-workers. The next day, Max called his savior. They talked for half an hour and arranged to meet. He waited for her outside the park in the evening, but she didn't show. Almost 40 minutes later, Max's phone rang. "I'm sorry. We had an emergency surgery. I couldn't call. I just got free now. You must have been waiting for me." "It's okay. You're a doctor. I understand." "Well, maybe some other time, or should I pick you up now?" "No, I need some fresh air. I'll walk." Max frowned. It looked like she didn't want to see him. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes, of course I am. It's just that a patient died during surgery in front of me. He was a young guy. He wasn't even 30. I'm going to take a walk. It'll make you feel better. No offense. It's the job." In the days that followed, Max and Lena only corresponded online. He wrote her that he was terribly bored at the meeting, that the business sharks were trying to eat him all the time, and he felt like a little boy without a scuba diver and a life preserver. Among them, Lena also wrote that the head nurse didn't like her, and the new surgeon on the contrary. They were very cute, teasing each other. It was deliciously adolescent flirting that caused both Lena and Max to walk around with smiles sliding off their faces. Max was going through a rough patch at work. One of the big investors left the company, saying that he cooperated with the bank only out of respect for his father. He didn't want anything to do with his son. This event could have set off a chain reaction. Other investors could have followed suit, and then the bank would have been ruined. To prevent this from happening, Max and his mother decided to unite the team and invite all the employees, partners, and investors to Max's birthday party. Very coincidentally, he had a birthday at the beginning of September, 25 years old. The date is significant and the reason to gather all very solid. Mom did the organization of the banquet for about 50 people. The beginning of autumn was warm, and it was decided to hold the party by the river in the open air. They rented a place, decorated it, ordered beautiful tables like for a wedding, even invited a specialist in music selection, organized the stage and karaoke. The place was remote from residential buildings, so the noise could not disturb the neighbors. There were a lot of flowers around. Everything was done in the best way. A photographer and a veilleur man who blows soap bubbles were invited. That's what Max called him to my mom's idea. She remembered that as a child her son loved soap bubbles, blowing them from the balcony and watching them fly through the air. Closer to the beginning of the event, when everything was ready, Max's mother suggested that he come to the party with one of her friend's daughters. Your father was right. You need a wife. Everybody remembers you the way you came in here at 19. You changed women like a glove. Married ladies would have affairs with you, and then their husbands would fight you. Do you remember? You made one of your own. Fame. And now we've lost a fat investor. He doesn't want to deal with a spoiled brat and a major. And he doesn't care that you're 25 instead of 19, that you've grown up and you're not getting 3 girls at a time anymore. You need to reinvent yourself. That's why we're throwing this party. It was hard to admit, but his father had been right during their last fight. Maybe not about everything. Sure, marrying the first woman he met to impress him was strange, but it made sense. And it was probably a practice that existed in certain circles. Maybe it was just another one of my father's brilliant strategies that Max hadn't wanted to use, and now he regretted it. He sighed. I'll come with the girl. There is one, I like her, but we're only friends with her. I think she won't refuse to help me. That night Max dialed Lena's number. Hello, you're a medic, so you're supposed to help people in trouble. So I need help. It's a matter of life and not life. I'm listening. The girl sighed with a smile. She was at home, in her small apartment on the 9th floor, looking out the window at the lights of the city at night and drinking some kind of drink. Her mood was lousy. There had been a conflict with a patient at work. The head nurse was ranting and raving, and the new surgeon was throwing languid glances at her. And only Max made her happy, always sending her funny pictures about medicine, and not only. He was the only one who made her smile. And she was ready to ask him out herself because she was so tired of being alone. Her last relationship ended over 3 years ago. Since then, she had not dated anyone. There had been a bad breakup, a betrayal. At first, Lena thought she would never date again, but over time her opinion changed. The pain is gone, the feelings are forgotten. So he cheated, and he cheated, and he cheated. So now what? Because of this traitor to be alone all her life, she decided that the loneliness of 3 years should end. Max told her how important it was to make the right impression on the right people. He begged her to go with him. Why me? Why don't you look for a girl in your circle who knows how to talk to all that elite? I'm not the kind of girl who can do that. I'm the kind of guy who can give you an enema if you have to. It's embarrassing. Come on. You're the most beautiful woman I know. After that compliment, Lena couldn't say no. She chose the best dress she had, borrowed her cousin's shoes, and waited outside her house for her boyfriend at the appointed time that evening. He arrived on time, minute to minute. You're punctual, Mr. Max, as she said, smiling. And you're so charming that I'd marry you right now, Miss Lena. He said, not the least bit deceitful. The girl wore a silvery, shiny dress that accentuated her lovely form and flowing, feminine curves. Her hair was beautifully styled and fell in waves over her shoulders. With her makeup, she looked like a Hollywood star, as if she had just stepped off the cover of a magazine. Max was speechless, and he stared at her the whole way and couldn't get enough of her. It got dark. They drove up, got out of the car, and everyone gasped when they saw the guy with such a beauty. In fact, he looked great himself. Tuxedo, high, and perfume. Now he was driving his own car, and he knew he should have done that from the beginning. Taking his father's car was a mistake. Everyone saw him as Dad's spoiled brat, with no personality of his own, as if he were wearing his older brother's clothes. In his car, Max looked like a young professional with good looks, promising and serious. On top of that, a family man. Well, almost. Meet my fiancée. Lena, he told everyone. She captivated the guests without saying a few words. Her insanely beautiful smile was enough. Max noticed that all the men invited to the party with their wives were looking at her. He decided he would ask her to go out with him tonight and wouldn't take no for an answer. He fell in love like a schoolboy. Max's mother stood at a distance the whole time, entertaining the guests with stories about how serious her son had become and what he had been like as a child. She was trying to win over investors and give the right impression of her son. She was very good at it. And one of the guests remarked, "York, hey Max, your girlfriend is a copy of your mother. How amazing. Psychologists say it right. Boys are looking for a wife for girls who look like their mothers. And you are a shining example of that." Lena smiled, and the boy joked back. Everything was going great until one of the invited bankers recognized the girl. "Wait a minute. You're the one who gave me that shot in the hospital the other day that later became inflamed. You are the armless nurse I went to complain about," blurted out a middle-aged man with second-degree obesity and a red face without a neck, with a bow tie tied at the bottom. The girl was confused. She only now remembered where she had seen the man. It was the same conflicted patient who 2 days ago had threatened to sue her because her shot was inflamed. The whole department explained to him that the injection itself was very painful, and bumps after such injections were normal. Almost everyone had them, and the inflammation was easily relieved. A simple lotion. It was explained to you that I had nothing to do with it. The injections themselves are hard to resorb. I'm an excellent shot, she excused herself, feeling herself blush. Everyone around her looked at her. There was an awkward and long pause. The guy came up to her and hugged her. "Yes, my fiancée is a nurse, and I'm proud of her. She's doing her job, helping people. We met her when I was in an accident. She stopped the bleeding and kept me from dying. You know, she saved my life." And Max smiled and kissed the top of her head. The banquet continued. People went about their business again, gossiping and eating. Some even danced. The girl approached the man, realizing that she needed to make things right. "Forgive me, I never meant to hurt anyone." In the prick situation, it really could have been the nurse's fault. But then it would have been inflamed right away, and there would have been redness. You just had a bump left. Maybe you were sitting on something cold and got a cold shock. The man was embarrassed. "Okay, I'm sorry too. Let's just forget about it. Now everyone knows that Max's fiancée saw my bare ass." "I shouldn't have brought it up in the first place," the man said. "Was that the end of the conflict?" Maybe it was. The girl walked away from her former patient in confused feelings. She was upset, but a couple of glasses of champagne the guy served her made up for it. They did a slow dance, joking, laughing, and flirting. Max asked her about her family. She told him that she had been all alone for a very long time. Her father never existed. He left her for another woman when she was 3 and divorced several more times after that. She knows for a fact that she has brothers and sisters somewhere else, and her mother was ill and died not long ago. She has been all alone ever since. Later, Max allowed himself to hug her in public. He was afraid that if he did it somewhere private, she would push him away, but she hugged him too and smiled. A spark flashed between them. At one of the slow dances, he kissed her, and she responded to the kiss. They didn't say it out loud, but they both knew that the kissing and hugging wasn't for show. They wanted it for themselves. Everything was wonderful until his mother came up to them. "Mommy!" Lena shouted suddenly and fell down without feeling. Max caught her, and his mother remained standing there, not understanding anything. Not to spoil the party, Max told everyone that his bride's blood pressure dropped and carried her to the river. On one of the benches, the girl came to her senses. She saw Max's mother's face in front of her and again frightenedly grabbed her heart. "Are you alive? How can this be? I buried you," she whispered, looking at her. Then the mother of the hero of the occasion began to fear herself. "Buried? What are you talking about? Max, what is wrong with her? Is she crazy?" Max helped Lena up. Lena, what's wrong with you? It's my mother. And what's wrong with you? Are you confusing her with someone else? Lena frowned and looked at the woman's face. I am normal. Not crazy, don't worry. Abruptly she answered. Then what was all that about? You fainted during the party. What will the guests think? The mother resented. Max interfered in the ensuing argument. They will think that my bride is expecting a baby. Let them think what they want. See, she doesn't feel well. The girl finally recovered from her shock. She opened the locket that hung around her neck. In it was a picture of a woman. Here, look, now you too will faint. This is my mother. Max and his mother looked at the photo. The boy frowned, and the woman pressed her hand to her lips and cried. Her lips treacherously trembled, though she tried to hold on. The son had never seen her like that before. Who is it? He asked her seriously. She was silent and stared at him. Are you her sister? Lena asked seriously. Mom sank down on the bench and wiped away her tears. Did she tell you about me? Asked the one, frightened. She said she had a twin sister and that she died when my mom got pregnant with me. Mom took a breath. She gazed greedily into the girl's face. She didn't lie to you. To her, I was dead. Your mother was my twin sister. She and I were always together, always the two of us. There isn't a single picture of me alone. Is that why you never showed me your childhood photos? Only the ones that were cut in half. You cut your sister off. But why? Max wondered. He felt that important information had been hidden from him all his life. And what was even scarier was the realization that perhaps his cousin was sitting next to him. We often quarreled with his sister, but we were never apart for long. That was until we were older. We both went to college and did equally well at school. True, she was more interested in the humanities, but I pushed her aside and we both got into economics. I passed for her. Some exams, she did others for me. No one saw any difference between us. We were so much alike. We had just graduated and came to my parents in the village. A young engineer came there with a friend. My father? The boy asked. Mom nodded. Jacob was good-looking, and we both fell in love with him. I don't even know which one of us first. She claimed she was. I thought I was. We were friends with him and his friends, going out together in the evenings to pass the time. We were moving to the city and looking for work. We couldn't decide where we wanted to live. I was drawn to the city while my sister wanted to stay in the country. At the time, there were vacancies for both of us. We couldn't imagine life apart. At the same time, I fell unluckily from a chair while hanging curtains, and I twisted my ankle. I didn't walk for 2 days, and then I went out with friends again. But during those 2 days, my sister managed to seduce Jacob. They started holding hands, kissing, and snuggling, while I smiled and scratched my own hands bloody to keep from crying. I asked my sister to give him to me, but she said she loved him and he loved her. Then I went to see him one day before she did and kissed him. He only noticed that I wasn't her during the kiss. You're Anya, not Jessica. You're Anya, not Jessica, he said. And then I confessed my feelings to him. I told him that I loved him, that my love was enough for both of us. I asked for a chance to get to know me better, but he said he loved his sister, her soul, not her looks. He said we were very different, that she always hugged him by the neck when she kissed him, and I didn't dare. That was my mistake. I left him in tears, and at home my sister came at me with her fists. She yelled at me not to dare go anywhere near her boyfriend. That same day, she cut my hair off. You know, she and I had the same thick, long white braids. We were proud of them. Her hair was below her waist. How she decided to do it, I didn't understand. She had a short haircut, chopped off her hair to her shoulders, to distinguish herself from me. I realized that day that I had lost her. I was jealous of her and Jacob. and Jacob of her. I felt so bad that I wanted out of this life. She was all the world, my soulmate. I knew it was wrong to take a boyfriend away from my sister, but my feelings were stronger than me. I was angry with her. I thought she was trading me, her sister, for him. And then I made the biggest mistake of my life. Anne wiped away the tears. She was having a hard time talking about it. App and Max listened to her with their mouths hanging open. It had been a night of discovery. So many events all at once, so much information, so many feelings. What mistake? Lena asked, and Mother continued her story. She wanted to relieve her soul. I told everything to my parents, and they forbade my sister to see him. For us, the word parents was legal back then. We had a strict father, a very respected man, the chairman, but Jessica had no intention of giving up. I overheard her talking to her girlfriend. She was going to meet Jacob by the river that night and spend the night with him, and then tell her parents about it. Her father would definitely make them get married after that. We had been raised strictly, and manners were different then. We were 23 years old, and neither of us had been in a relationship before. He was the first one we both fell in love with. I saw Jessica going on a date, envied her with black envy. I followed her in there by the river. While no one saw, I hit her on the head with all my might with some driftwood. Then I ran home, cut off her hair as quickly as I could, and went there. I was afraid I'd killed my sister, buying a pulse. I realized I had just stunned her, and she was going to wake up soon. I wasn't thinking straight. I was scared and in pain. And then I saw him ahead of me, and I went to him. I put my arms around his neck like she did. We spent that night together. When it was over, Jessica came over, her cheek all bloody. Jacob understood, frightened, and I lay there with him, smiling and telling him that he was mine now. There was a scandal at home. I said I had spent the night with Jacob. Jessica told my parents the cost of the night. My father said Jacob would have to marry me. He found his parents' phone number and had a serious talk with them. They agreed to marry me, but only if I was pregnant. The city people were more free-spirited. So I lied, said I was late, but not yet pregnant. I paid a doctor, and she wrote me a fake pregnancy certificate. We started getting ready for the wedding. Jacob hated me at first, but I was pregnant by him, and he didn't dare be rude to me, and I tried to make him like me. I told him how much I loved him, how much I loved him, how much I cared about him. I asked him about his plans for the future. He told me that he wanted to start his own company. I helped him figure it out before the wedding. Our relationship got better, but he still loved Jessica. A few days before the wedding, Jessica begged me on her knees to leave Jacob. But I told her I was really expecting a baby. I lied to her and said no. Then she said she would die without him and that I wasn't her sister anymore. We had a big fight. I knew that after what I did there in the river, our relationship would not work out. But I fought for love, and I believed that the end justifies any means. The day before the wedding, I caught Jacob in bed with her. At first he said that he confused us because we are the same. And then, in a burst of emotion, he admitted that he loved her and only her. "But you'll marry me," I said, and held my chin up proudly. I left the room. The next day we got married, and he and I went to town. We agreed never to talk about how we got married. He forbade me to speak or even think of my sister, but I swore to him that I would be a faithful wife. And I was. When he found out I wasn't pregnant, there was a scandal. He wanted a divorce and went looking for Jessica, but he couldn't find her, and that's the only reason he stayed with me. Jessica left us all. She went to the other side of the country and never once called her parents or me. I didn't know she was back in town and living here. She never got in touch with me. My mother finished the story. She was all in tears. So was Lena. "So you gave birth to me later?" Max asked. He looked at Lena and realized with horror that he had fallen in love with his sister. No, no. His mother shook her head. God punished me. I was never able to give birth to a child. There were several unsuccessful attempts. A year after we were married, we took you out of the orphanage. So, not her brother, half-brother. Your father, it turns out, was having an affair. He didn't like me and cheated on me. It happened right after we were married, and then throughout our lives. I put up with it, kept my mouth shut. The main thing was that he was there for me to be his wife. His first girlfriend died in a car accident. The baby ended up in an orphanage. Jacob found him, and we adopted the boy. He said it was his baby, that you were his own son. That woman gave birth to you supposedly by him, but we never checked. I raised you as my own. I'm your mother. It doesn't matter what blood type it is. The mother was afraid that her son would turn away from her after hearing the story, but he put his arm around her shoulders. It's not for me to judge you, and you're right, you're my mother. No one is or will be more my mother. So, are we half-brother and sister? She asked the girl bitterly. Her mother nodded. So it turns out that we are. They talked for hours. It turned out that Lena was Mom's niece. That's why they looked so much alike in person. Of all the possible girls, Max brought her to the banquet. It was just unreal. The evening was over. Max took Lena home. On the way, they were silent only at the driveway. He took her hand when she was about to leave. Wait, we have to be sure. Let's take a parentage test. Who knows who that woman gave birth to me? What if we're not related? He looked at her lips, not daring to touch them. She was very close. What then? She asked hopefully. Then I would say that I fell in love with you with no memory. Let's do that test. She nodded. She wanted so badly to kiss him at that moment. They had this attraction and there was no strength to resist it. They barely let go of each other that night. The next morning, Max picked her up in his beautiful white car. He called her. The girl answered in a sleepy voice, but tried to hide it. She could not tell him that she had cried all night and had only fallen asleep in the morning. Yeah, I know you have evening shifts tonight. How about a ride, he suggested. Okay, let's do it. Soon the girl came out of the driveway in a light orange windbreaker. Her red hair was pulled up into a ponytail. She got into a ponytail. She got into his car and the guy started the engine. You know, I just realized now that you took after your grandfather. He had bright red hair when he was young. My mom told me. And my grandmother, I hardly remember her. Lena smiled. I have a picture. Mom was sentimental. You know, I don't understand how they could have fought so much. It's not my place to judge them, but I put myself in their shoes. I don't understand how it happened. Your mother made a mess of things, of course, but so did mine. They're sisters. I mean, how could you fight like that over some guy? Well, actually, he's your father. You have his nose, Max grinned. What about you? Do you look anything like him? Lena asked. I did when I was a kid. You know, the world is full of people who look alike who aren't related to each other. They touched on an exciting subject. At this point, the guy stopped the car in front of the forensics building. I called here. They agreed to help. The result will be ready in a day or two. They said they'd try to be quicker. Let's go. She nodded. This was important to her. The two of them entered and left the building 15 minutes later. They took the materials for the test and let them go, promising to get it done as soon as possible. When Max got home, his phone rang. It was his mother. Son, I'd like to talk to Lena. You have her number, don't you? Go ahead, you're on speakerphone, he said, pushing the button. Are you two together? She was surprised. Hello? Hello. I'd like to talk to you if I may. But not like this. Not on speakerphone. How about lunch at the cafe, she suggested. Lena was embarrassed. She hadn't yet realized how she felt about this woman, because she had hurt her own mother so badly. She should have been mad at her, but she looked so much like her mother, and the girl missed her mother so terribly that she wanted to meet her aunt. Besides, if she had been a real villain, she wouldn't have confessed to everything. Why? But she told them the whole truth outright. She had made terrible mistakes in her youth, and who hadn't? The girl decided that she would not take on the role of judge and would definitely meet with her. They agreed to talk at the downtown cafe on Prospect Street. The girl got there and saw that she had already taken their table. "What will you have?" she asked. "Coffee. I've been sleepy all day today." "I'll pay and please let me feed my niece." "I'll pay and please let me feed my niece," she asked, smiling. What a long time since the girl had seen that smile. She just couldn't refuse her and ordered a salad. "Tell me about your mother's life. I want to know everything. I regretted what I did the second after I did it. When I hit her there on the beach, I knew I'd done something stupid. But I couldn't stop myself. I loved him so much and I regretted what I had done. All my life I looked for my sister. I didn't know she was pregnant with you that night before we were married, but when I realized whose daughter you were, I immediately saw Jacob's features in you." "Are you 27? She asked. Lena nodded. Then she was right. Jessica wasn't the type to quickly turn on another man. You said your husband cheated on you, and you cheated on him. Were you happy after all you had done?" My aunt smiled sadly. "Yes. I was happy in my own way. I always loved my husband, always admired him, even when I caught him with his mistresses. I was angry at them, not him. I dragged them out of the house by their hair. Jacob was handsome and rich. What more did he need? Of course, everyone was all over him like flies. And your mother, was she happy?" Lena shrugged her shoulders. "She was working at the school when we moved here. We spent our childhood in Austin. Apparently that's where she ran away from you guys after everything. I went to school. We moved here when she found out her mother had died. We were with her at the grave. She was crying a lot, showing me my grandfather's grave, the one with the red hair when she was young." The woman smiled. She had warm kinship feelings for the girl. The bond between sisters and twins is always very strong, and Lena was all that was left of her little sister on this earth. All her flesh and blood. "Was she married?" Auntie asked. "No. She had a man, but they were more like friends. When we moved here, I was in 7th grade. That man saw us off. He didn't want to leave everything and come with us, even though my mother suggested it. They let each other go, and then we moved. That's when Mom started getting sick. She smoked a lot, and first she got one diagnosis, then another. She had chronic lung disease. She quit smoking when it was too late. I went to school when she told me she'd had lung cancer for a long time. She was being treated for it in secret so I wouldn't know. I was living in a dormitory at medical school at the time. My mom would go to treatments. They helped. And then, at some point, I got a call from the hospital telling me that my mom had stopped being treated. That is, she said she was tired. There was nothing I could do. I begged her to get treatment, but she just shook her head and said she would live out her life without a bunch of medication. She would have lived if she had agreed to the surgery at the time. But you can't use your head. I think she just didn't want to live. Maybe she had some kind of depression. I don't know. She just refused treatment and started drowning. She faded away slowly. She was on her feet until her last days. I'm so sorry I couldn't talk her into treatment." My aunt wiped away a tear. I too had been depressed for the last few years. They say twins can sense each other for a reason. Maybe she felt my pain. Maybe I felt hers. You can't tell now. When did she die? April 20. I don't remember if I felt anything, but I remember that I had migraine attacks. She had a headache in those days, too. They talked for over an hour and couldn't get enough of each other. My aunt fell in love with her sister and was ashamed of what she had done, regretting everything. She had to let Jacob go without getting involved, and now she was clearly aware of that. In the evening, the girl went out for her shift at the hospital. The hesitant young surgeon, who had deliberately taken the evening shift that day, finally dared to approach her. "Listen, I'm new in town. Why don't you show me around? Let's go for a walk this weekend," he suggested ineptly, hiding his excitement. Lena smiled. "Are you asking me out on a date? And if so, what do you say?" he asked excitedly. "Not long ago I would have been happy to, but now I can't. I'm not free." "I'm sorry," he frowned. "Do you have someone?" She shook her head and briefly told her story. "What a passion you have. Haven't you become a TV star yet?" He smiled. Lena smiled too. They had a nice chat. The surgeon promised that from now on his interest in her would be purely friendly. At the same time, Max was not finding himself. He had been working until the evening, and now, sitting within four walls, he was trying to think of an excuse to write to his beloved. His thoughts were confused. Surely she must be busy working, maybe in surgery. And what was there to write? He paced from side to side, looking out the window. He was ready to give any money to know the result here and now and not to suffer. If they were brother and sister, which was more likely, according to his mother, then he would have to live with the feeling somehow, extinguish it. He thought he might have to get drunk a couple of times. Maybe he'd hit the big time again. The thoughts tormented him until Max found the TV remote. He'd forgotten the last time he'd watched that zombie TV. The next day he worked hard until the phone rang. There was a call about the analysis. He was ready. Max dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. There a pretty girl handed him an envelope containing the cherished paper. He opened it. 99 chance you're related. He didn't read the whole thing. That line was enough. He sighed heavily. He had to accept reality. Lena was his sister now. He got in his car and drove up to her driveway because he didn't dare tell her the bad news over the phone. He rang the doorbell. Lena opened it. "Hello, hello." She wasn't expecting to see him. She was wearing simple pink shorts and a tank top. On thin drawstrings, she let him in. Max came in, sat down on the couch, and handed her an envelope with a very serious look. "What?" she asked excitedly, still holding the envelope in her hands. "We are brother and sister, and I can never tell you everything I feel." Max lowered his head. The girl asked. He shook his head. She didn't believe him, opened the envelope and began to read the letter. Soon she looked up and raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Max, are you Brunhilde, Ismailova, Nazareth?" "No. These are not our tests. Did you even read the name on the envelope?" Max approached her. Indeed, the analysis belonged to some stranger. She was checking for a relationship to another woman. "Shit, we got the envelope mixed up. Let's go together." Lena shook her head. "I can't." Max took her hand. "Why?" "I'm scared," the girl said. He hugged her, kissed the top of her head, and left the apartment. Promising to return soon. He was gone for 20 minutes. Only 20 minutes. But in that time she had time to reevaluate her whole life. She tried to figure out what she would do if it turned out he was her brother. Probably have to disappoint his investors, who were now waiting for the announcement of their wedding. And she would probably have to attend his real wedding when he met someone else. The doorbell rang. Lena opened it without even asking who it was. In front of her stood Max. Without saying a word, he kissed her on the lips, pressed her to him as she had long wanted. She kissed him back warmly. "So we're not brother and sister." Still, he hadn't voiced it. She wanted to hear it. Max, don't let her out of his arms. He looked into her eyes. Brother and sister, of course, why do you ask? Lena playfully punched him with her fists, and he grabbed her in his arms and continued to kiss her. Only toward evening did they break away from each other and go to tell the news to the boyfriend's mother. I was expecting this outcome. Jacob and I discussed the possibility of this, but he didn't want to do the test. Said he didn't want to do the test. Said he didn't want to know. He just wanted to raise his son. He loved you, son, in his own way, but he did. In a way, it was my fault. He wasn't violent before. In the beginning, I broke his life, and you, Lena. But most of all, I hurt your mother, and I hurt myself. We were drawn to each other all our lives, but through my fault we could no longer find common ground. She cried again. A few days later, the aunt and her niece went to the cemetery, where the aunt had a long talk with her sister. Seeing her face on the gravestone was eerie. She was aware that it was her sister, but it didn't make much difference to her. She felt that a part of herself was gone from her life along with her. Afterwards, the woman confessed and crossed herself. It was only then that she felt a little better. Max and Lina decided to have a wedding in the spring. All the companions were invited to the wedding. Max persuaded her to leave her profession and help him in his business, but the bride did not agree. She loved medicine and always dreamed of becoming a psychiatrist. So Max paid for her education, and the happy girl passed her exams beforehand in April, becoming a medical student. After the lavish wedding, she and her husband flew to the sea and lived on the coast for 3 weeks. It was the best honeymoon ever. They dissolved into each other and lost track of time, and when Max returned, he got busy. He talked about needing heirs. I'd like to have kids. The girl said at first. She knew she was in her 30s and she should have the baby right now. After all, first the studies will get in the way, then the internship. Then she would have to work for a couple of years to secure her position, and then retirement will not be far away. And while she was in doubt, God decided everything for her. Already by the fall, before the start of her training, she saw the cherished 2 lines on the test. Her aunt was the happiest of all. She accepted the girl as her own daughter and did not dare dream of her. That is why the newlyweds stayed to live in their house. There were many rooms and enough places for everyone. When the girl was 12 weeks pregnant, she had an ultrasound. Max held her hand. He was cheering with all his might for her to have a boy, an heir. He would name him after his father, or rather after her own father, whom she had never met. Lena, on the other hand, wanted a girl. Her aunt had asked that her daughter be named after her sister, and everyone was in agreement. The woman who performed the procedure poured gel on the pregnant woman's not yet round tummy and began to drive the device over it. Multiple pregnancy. It's 13 weeks. It's 13 weeks, he said. What? The couple asked in one voice. They didn't expect twins. You're having twins. It's too early to say what the sex will be. I know you weren't expecting this. Will you keep the baby? The doctor asked. Of course we will. Of course we will. Of course we will. If the boy answered, and the girl nodded her head in solidarity with the decision. Do you have twins in your family? Most of the time, when someone in the family has twins, it's inherited. So you wouldn't be the first. Don't worry about it. We had 3 a couple of years ago and we're fine. All boys, all the same face. And now they're in kindergarten. Yeah, we had twins. Doesn't that happen after a generation? The girl asked. No, that's a misconception. It might not happen for generations, or it might not happen in the next generations, or it might happen in the next generation. They were silent on the ride home. Do you think that our children will follow our mother's example? The boy asked, breaking the silence. What if they do? I do not want them to fall apart like that. Honey, anybody can have a fight. You and I, friends, girlfriends, brothers, and sisters. Everybody fights. It's not inherited. Let our children fix what our mothers couldn't, and let them fight, but make peace every time afterward. Lena smiled. You're right, aren't you? It's a gift from God. Twins. We will become parents of two adorable girls. Lena glowed. But man supposes and God disposes. A few months later, an ultrasound revealed that Lena was expecting two boys.